A winter's stillness. Sedona's desert winter had a stillness to it, an eerie, haunting calm that made every gust of wind feel like a whisper from the past. Eleanor Myers, known as Ellie to those few still close to her, stood at the edge of her porch, a ceramic mug of chamomile tea cradled in both hands. The rising sun cast a soft gold over the red rock cliffs, painting the horizon in hues of rust and rose. Morning frost still clung to the sagebrush that dotted her yard, and the air held that biting edge only Arizona winters could manage. Her dog, Jasper, a 6-year-old golden retriever with a streak of gray beginning to show around his muzzle, lay curled by the door. His ears twitched with every bird call and distant crack of dry branches. He had become her only true companion since the accident. Ellie took a sip of tea and closed her eyes for a moment. Life had grown quieter since Robert passed 2 years ago. Too quiet some days. The cabin they'd built together now stood like a museum of their love. Shelves of his old geology books, her canvases leaning against walls, unfinished. A record player gathering dust in the corner, still holding their favorite Miles Davis album. At 48, Ellie bore the elegance of someone who had known joy and pain in equal measure. Her auburn hair was now streaked with silver, usually tied back in a low bun smeared with paint. Her eyes, once full of spark, had softened into something deeper, resigned, perhaps, but not broken. The neighbors in Sedona rarely saw her. She came into town only for supplies and the occasional art sale. The rest of the time she painted, hiked, and tried not to drown in memory. Jasper stirred suddenly, ears perked. Ellie followed his gaze toward the edge of the pine and juniper tree line that wrapped behind the cabin. Something moved, just a blur, a rustle too purposeful for wind. She stepped forward, narrowing her eyes. Nothing, just empty brush and long morning shadows. Still, Jasper remained rigid, his tail lowered, but not tucked. "Probably a coyote," she murmured, setting the mug on the porch rail. But the unease lingered. Later that morning, while wiping her paintbrush on a cloth, she heard Jasper bark, once sharp, then silence. When she opened the front door, he was sitting upright, ears trained on the same line of trees. Her eyes scanned again. Nothing moved, but something felt present. She told herself it was just the wind and the weight of solitude playing tricks. Still, she double-checked that the back door was locked. The desert, though familiar, always kept its secrets. And sometimes the wild crept in, not with a roar, but with silence. Not every knock at the door comes from a stranger. Some come from the wild. Eyes in the night. That night, a sharp chill swept over the valley. The wind howled between the canyon walls, shaking the trees like brittle bones. Ellie had just finished cleaning her brushes when Jasper, lying by the fireplace, suddenly rose to his feet. His body tensed, head turning sharply toward the front door. Then came the sound. It wasn't a knock in the traditional sense, more like a soft thump, then another, a weight pressing against the wood, followed by a low, rasping sound, something between a hiss and a breath. Ellie froze, her heart hitching. Jasper growled, not loud, but deep and steady. He stood facing the door, tail stiff, fur bristling slightly along his back. Ellie reached for the flashlight beside the mantel and slowly approached the door, placing her hand gently on Jasper's head to calm him. He didn't flinch, but his growl deepened. She switched off the cabin lights, creating total darkness inside. Then, as quietly as possible, she cracked the curtain on the window beside the door. Her breath caught. There, no more than 3 feet away, stood a bobcat. It was unmistakable, the tufted ears, the short bob tail, the pale spots on its tawny fur. But it didn't look wild in the way she remembered seeing them before on hikes. It looked still, not afraid, not aggressive, just present. Its body was tense, but its yellow eyes locked onto hers without a hint of rage. Then Ellie saw it. Behind the bobcat, almost hidden in the porch shadow, a smaller shape shifted. At first, she thought it might be a rabbit, but then it moved, revealing a tiny, frail bobcat kitten. Limping, its back leg barely touched the ground. It staggered forward and collapsed beside the mother. Ellie's instinct screamed to shut the curtain and back away. But something rooted her there, a flicker of recognition. Not logical, not rational, just deeply human. This wasn't an attack. This was a plea. She slowly pulled the curtain wider and pressed her hand against the cold window pane. The mother bobcat didn't move. Her breath fogged in the desert air, but her eyes never left Ellie's. The kitten whimpered, its tiny body shivering from the cold. Ellie whispered, almost to herself, "What happened to you?" Jasper let out a soft whine. Ellie glanced down at him. He wasn't growling anymore, just watching. Cautious, but calm. Ellie backed away from the door and grabbed a towel from the kitchen drawer. She wrapped it around a small dish, filled it with leftover roast chicken, and added a shallow bowl of warm water. With trembling fingers, she opened the door just a crack, enough to slide the towel onto the porch. Then she shut it, fast, but not in fear. She stood at the window again and waited. The bobcat waited too, but the kitten, after a minute, began to crawl forward, decision in the dark. The desert night settled in thick around the cabin, and with it came a silence so complete it seemed to breathe. Ellie sat by the window, the flashlight resting on the table beside her, casting a soft halo against the glass. Outside, the bobcat and her kitten remained motionless, still watching, still waiting. The food lay untouched. Ellie's hand hovered over her phone more than once, wondering whether to call animal control or wildlife services. But she stopped herself every time. She had lived in Sedona long enough to know what usually happened to nuisance animals reported too close to human dwellings. Relocation, if they were lucky. Euthanasia if they weren't. And there was something about the way the mother bobcat didn't run, didn't snarl, didn't flee. She was too calm, or too exhausted. Ellie's thoughts drifted to Robert. He had been the one with the wilderness instincts, always first to kneel when they saw a snake crossing the trail, or stop to examine a wounded bird with eyes full of reverence. "The wild doesn't owe us fear," he used to say. "It gives what it can, then walks away." She looked at the clock, 10:27 p.m. Jasper hadn't moved from his spot by the front door. He seemed to know that this was not a normal night, that something sacred was happening just on the other side of that threshold. Outside, the kitten stirred. Its tiny body lifted slightly, but it didn't stand. It only managed to crawl, inch by inch, toward the towel. The mother watched but didn't move. Her sides rose and fell in slow, heavy breaths. As the kitten reached the edge of the food, Ellie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It ate, tentatively at first, then faster. Between bites, it looked up, once, twice, toward the door, toward the light behind the window. Then, after a few minutes, it collapsed again beside the dish, its belly full and body too weak to go any farther. Ellie stood up. Her knees ached as she bent to pick up the thick fleece blanket from the living room armchair. She hesitated only a second before she opened the front door fully and stepped outside. The wind was biting. Her breath fogged the air instantly. She knelt beside the kitten, careful not to make sudden moves. The mother bobcat stood, but didn't retreat. She simply watched, an unblinking statue under the pale moonlight. "I just want to help," Ellie whispered, her voice carried softly by the wind. The kitten let out a tiny mewl. Its ears twitched, but it didn't back away as Ellie lifted it into the folds of the blanket. She wrapped it gently, shielding it from the cold, and turned toward the door. The mother bobcat made a low, breathy sound, half growl, half cry, but still did not attack. Her body was tense, eyes locked onto Ellie. Ellie stopped at the door, looked back. "You can follow," she said. "Or not, but this little one, he won't survive out here." Then she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Jasper stood as she entered. He sniffed the bundle and wagged his tail, slowly, cautiously, but without a growl. Ellie placed the kitten on a towel-lined basket beside the fireplace. Its tiny body trembled under the fleece, but its breathing steadied. Outside, the mother bobcat remained on the porch. She didn't leave, not that night, against the odds. By sunrise, the bobcat kitten was still alive, weak but alive. Ellie hadn't slept. She sat slumped on the floor in sweatpants and a flannel shirt, her head resting against the couch, a half-drunk cup of black coffee cooling beside her. Jasper lay beside the basket, his eyes flickering open every few minutes, ears twitching at the faintest noise. The kitten, wrapped tightly in fleece, had barely stirred since Ellie brought it inside. It was dangerously underweight, its back leg clearly injured, and patches of its coat were missing. Still, it breathed, and that was enough for now. Ellie gently touched the soft fur above its eyes, then reached for her phone and took a picture. Not for social media, not for anyone else. Just for her, for the record, for the moment. Outside, the mother bobcat had vanished. Ellie checked the porch at dawn, half hoping to find her still waiting. But only paw prints remained in the light dusting of red sand. She stood there longer than necessary, the cold air nipping at her cheeks. "She left it," she whispered to herself. But the words didn't sound like abandonment. They sounded like trust. Back inside, Jasper followed her to the basket and sat down, resting his chin just inches from the kitten's head. His tail wagged in slow, careful beats. Every time the kitten let out a soft breath, Jasper's ears would twitch as if counting the rhythm. The day moved in slow fragments, Ellie researching how to hydrate bobcat kittens without risking their digestion, calling wildlife rehab centers only to get voicemails or, due to weather closures, recordings. A rare snowstorm had shut down access roads, and even Sedona's animal control said they'd be out of reach for at least 2 days. So it was up to her. She warmed goat milk on the stove and dipped the corner of a cloth into it. The kitten, barely conscious, suckled in short, desperate bursts. Every few hours, Ellie repeated the process. When she paused to rest her eyes, Jasper took position at the edge of the basket like a sentry. That afternoon, she gave the kitten a name. Tamar, she whispered. It meant palm tree in Hebrew, strong, quiet, and native to the desert, a name born of survival and resilience. By nightfall, Tamar stirred more often. She even raised her head once and looked around. Her eyes were wide, pale green like desert sage. She didn't hiss. She didn't growl. She simply stared at Ellie, blinking slowly. Ellie whispered back, "You're safe here." Something cracked inside her when she said it. A wall that had stayed up for years, since Robert. She picked up her sketchbook and sat beside the basket. Without planning it, she began to draw, first Tamar's curled shape, then Jasper's silhouette watching her, then the faint outline of the mother bobcat in the snow outside her door. The lines came easily. Her hand remembered the flow, the balance of light and shadow. It felt like breathing again. That night, Jasper whimpered near the back door around 2 a.m. Ellie rose, groggy but alert. She cracked the door open. The mother bobcat was back. She didn't step onto the porch. She stayed at the edge of the trees, eyes glowing in the dark. Ellie knelt, her heart hammering. "She's okay," she said aloud, unsure why or for whom. "She's inside. She's healing." The bobcat didn't move, but she didn't flee either. The two women, one human, one wild, stood in silence for a full minute, separated by more than distance, yet closer than logic would allow. Then the bobcat turned and disappeared once again into the trees. Ellie closed the door and leaned her forehead against it. "You came back to check," she whispered. "You didn't leave her after all." She turned to see Tamar sleeping, belly rising and falling. Jasper, as always, watched. Trust earned. By the end of the week, Tamar was walking. Wobbly, clumsy, but walking. Ellie had fashioned a makeshift ramp, using a folded yoga mat so the little bobcat wouldn't have to leap in and out of the basket. Tamar used it like a pro by day 4. She no longer needed to be fed with a cloth. She lapped warm milk from a shallow dish and nibbled on ground turkey mixed with goat yogurt and a pinch of eggshell powder, per the rehab instructions Ellie had scribbled in her sketchbook. Jasper had officially adopted her. He stayed near her all day, occasionally nudging her with his nose if she strayed too far, or letting her swat at his tail without protest. There was one moment, just one, when Tamar let out a squeaky growl and arched her back at Jasper after he sniffed too close to her bowl. Jasper, ever the gentleman, simply blinked and backed away. Ellie laughed harder than she had in months. Still, the house wasn't just filled with warmth and recovery. Outside, something was shifting. Neighbors had started to notice. Mrs. Keller from down the hill mentioned over the phone that her trash cans had been tipped over. "We think it's a coyote," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "You haven't seen anything strange, have you?" Ellie lied. "Just raccoons." But she knew better. The mother bobcat was still nearby. Every other night or so, Jasper would pace near the back door. Ellie would turn on the porch light and catch a flash of tawny fur vanishing into the dark. Once, she left a trail cam on the outer fence. The next morning, it had 3 pictures: a deer, a raccoon, and one crystal-clear shot of the bobcat staring directly into the lens. She printed that one and pinned it above her fireplace. By the second week, Tamar was chasing shadows and pouncing on Jasper's tail with reckless glee. Her limp remained, but it was improving. She even climbed onto the low windowsill one afternoon and fell asleep with the winter light warming her back. Ellie sat nearby, painting again. She had started a new series, Desert Daughters. Each canvas depicted female animals in wild Arizona landscapes, guarding, watching, surviving. The first painting was Tamar curled in Jasper's shadow beneath a saguaro cactus. The second was the mother bobcat, backlit by moonlight. She hadn't painted this much in years, but joy has its shadow. That Sunday, Ellie got a knock on the door. It was Mr. Belling, early 60s, retired sheriff, known for his prickly views and love of order. "You've got a predator near your property," he said, his jaw tight. "My dog's been barking like crazy every night, and my wife swears she saw something by the trash bins." Ellie folded her arms. "Probably just a stray cat." "That ain't no cat, Eleanor," he said, stepping forward. "You live too close to the cliffs. If you're feeding anything wild, intentionally or not, you're putting the whole neighborhood at risk." "I'm not," she said, calm but firm. Belling narrowed his eyes. "If I see that animal again, I'm calling Fish and Game." Ellie didn't respond. She waited until he walked away, then closed the door, her hands trembling. She didn't blame him. Not entirely. Fear had a way of twisting even decent people. But her chest ached at the idea of someone setting a trap for the mother bobcat. The thought of Tamar losing her mother permanently made her stomach turn. That night, Ellie stood at the window again, watching the trees sway. Somewhere out there, the bobcat waited. Watched, trusted, just like her daughter now curled at Ellie's feet, sound asleep beside a golden retriever who had once guarded his house from everything. Until the wild came knocking. Threats of civilization, Tamar had grown bolder. By her 3rd week in Ellie's home, the young bobcat was exploring every room with cautious curiosity. She leapt onto countertops, swatted at Jasper's toys, and once attempted to climb the bookshelf until it shook and nearly collapsed. Ellie couldn't help but laugh. She hadn't seen such mischief since Robert tried to build a homemade wine rack and accidentally drilled into the plumbing, Yet, beneath the joy, a slow, steady pressure was building. It started with a note slipped into her mailbox. "We know you're harboring a wild animal. This is a neighborhood, not a zoo." No name, just block letters on lined paper, folded and stained with oil. Then came the stares. At the post office, the grocery store, the woman at the checkout asked, not unkindly, "You doing okay up there, Ms. Myers? Folks say they've seen strange tracks by your fence." Even Mario, the teenage clerk at the feed store, raised an eyebrow when she bought a bulk bag of frozen chicken thighs and cans of goat milk. "That for Jasper?" he asked. She just smiled and nodded. But the real trouble came on a Thursday. Ellie was raking dried juniper leaves off the side yard when she heard voices. Low, urgent. Two men stood near the property line, one of them gesturing with his phone, the other pointing toward the tree line. Mr. Belling was among them. She approached calmly. "Everything all right, gentlemen?" Belling looked her square in the eye. "You're not fooling anyone, Eleanor. That bobcat's still around. And now my granddaughter can't play in the backyard because my daughter's scared. She'll get mauled. If I catch that animal on my property again, I'll shoot first and call after." "That animal," Ellie said quietly, "is a mother." Belling scoffed. "She's a threat. Wild animals don't belong near homes." Ellie's voice trembled, but she held firm. "You moved into their home. These red rocks and trees, they were theirs before they were ours." One of the other men, wearing a sheriff's deputy jacket, stepped forward. "Ms. Myers, we're not trying to cause trouble. But you do need to be aware. If that bobcat becomes a regular presence, Fish and Game will act. And you could be cited for endangering the neighborhood if you're found to be attracting her." They left soon after. Ellie stood alone in the yard, wind pulling at the hem of her coat, the rake limp in her hand. She knew they weren't bluffing. Inside the house, Tamar was curled in the window again, tail twitching lazily. Jasper lay at her feet, eyes half closed in contentment. The sight brought tears to Ellie's eyes. How could the world not see it? They weren't a danger. They were a family. And families protect each other, even from neighbors with loaded guns and shallow hearts. Fire on the wind. The sky turned copper just after noon. Ellie first noticed it while mixing paint by the window. A faint, acrid scent seeped into the air, smoke, dry and sharp. Her stomach dropped. Wildfire. In Sedona, fire season always loomed like a shadow. Dry winters made the forests brittle, and one spark was all it took. Ellie opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The wind carried a red haze across the horizon, and behind the trees, a plume of smoke twisted upward, ghost-like, into the sky. Birds flew low and fast. The forest was restless. Inside, Tamar sensed it. She paced the living room in tight, agitated circles. Her ears twitched, eyes wide. Jasper stood at the window, his tail stiff, his body alert. Ellie's phone buzzed. Emergency alert. Wildfire warning. All residents north of Dry Creek Road advised to prepare for evacuation. Her cabin was 3 miles from that line. She didn't hesitate. She had lived in Arizona long enough to know how quickly fire could turn. She grabbed the duffel bag from the closet, already half-packed from summer's near miss, and began to move. Flashlight. Check. Extra meds. Check. Sketchbook. Bottled water. Cans of food. Jasper's leash. Tamar's fleece. She stood in the living room, staring at the cat carrier by the door. Tamar wouldn't go in without a fight. Ellie crouched, whispering gently, coaxing. Tamar growled, then hissed. "We don't have time," Ellie muttered. Suddenly, Jasper barked once, sharp and urgent. Ellie turned to see what he'd noticed. The mother bobcat. She was back, on the edge of the porch, pacing, frantic. Her head whipped toward the trees, then toward the house, then back again. And then Ellie understood. The fire was near the den. Tamar's siblings were out there, alone. She looked at the bobcat, her eyes wide with something Ellie couldn't name. Desperation, instinct, a mother's impossible choice. Ellie stepped onto the porch, heart racing. She approached slowly. The bobcat didn't retreat. She circled, whining low in her throat, then took off toward the trees, stopping once to look back. It was an invitation or a plea. "I can't," Ellie whispered to no one. "I can't leave Jasper. I can't risk—" But Jasper had already stepped down off the porch, standing at the trailhead, waiting. Ellie looked at Tamar. The kitten had crawled onto the windowsill, watching her mother vanish into the forest. That was the moment Ellie made the choice. She turned, scooped Tamar into the blanket, slipped her into the duffel, and followed Jasper. Into the smoke, toward the flames, and into the heart of the wild once more. Running into the smoke, the air grew hotter with every step. Ellie gripped the strap of the duffel, cradling Tamar close against her chest. Her lungs burned, not from the run, but from the smoke curling between the trees like ghostly fingers. The trail was barely visible now, a jagged line of dry leaves and loose rock winding up the ridge. The mother bobcat moved ahead with fluid urgency, darting between manzanita and pine, stopping only to glance back and ensure they followed. Jasper, ever steady, trotted beside Ellie, his body pressed close, guiding her over each uneven rise. Somewhere ahead, babies. Somewhere behind, fire. The sky was no longer blue. It glowed a sinister orange, and the scent of burning creosote thickened by the minute. Ellie's eyes watered. Her sweater clung to her skin. Tamar trembled inside the blanket but didn't cry. They reached a break in the rocks, a split in the cliff face. The bobcat vanished through it. Ellie hesitated only a second before ducking inside. It wasn't a cave, not exactly. More like a pocket in the stone, hidden by fallen branches and shaded by dry brush. The air was cooler inside, muffled, the light dim. And then movement. Two tiny shapes. Crouched at the back of the den, pressed into the stone wall, were two kittens, barely bigger than Tamar, their fur covered in soot, eyes wide with fear. One mewled weakly. The other didn't move. The mother bobcat crept forward and began licking them, gently nudging their faces. Ellie crouched low, her heart breaking. One kitten tried to stand but stumbled. The other lay limp. "No," Ellie whispered. She dropped to her knees, opened the duffel, and carefully placed Tamar down. The kitten scrambled forward on instinct, calling to her siblings. Her mew was soft but clear, and both kittens responded. The limp one stirred slightly, lifting its head with effort. Jasper stood at the entrance, tail stiff, ears scanning the wind. Ellie looked around. Smoke now drifted into the cave. The fire was getting closer. "We have to go! Now!" The mother bobcat turned to her, eyes locking again. For the first time, Ellie saw a flicker of understanding there. Maybe trust, maybe thanks. "I'll carry them," Ellie said aloud, "but you have to help." She took off her jacket and laid it on the ground. With shaking hands, she placed the kittens in the folds and wrapped the sleeves around them like a sling. The bobcat didn't flinch. She followed as Ellie stepped back into the heat, her heart pounding. Together, woman, dog, and bobcat, they descended the burning hillside. Not as strangers, but as a pack, the fire's aftermath. By the time they reached the base of the ridge, the fire was less than a mile away. Flames licked the tops of pine trees, crackling like thunder in the dry air. Smoke coiled upward in thick gray spirals, blotting out the sky. Ellie's chest ached with every breath. Her legs were shaking, but she didn't stop. Jasper led them down the slope toward a narrow service road, a back access route rarely used except by rangers. Ellie prayed someone would be there. As they emerged from the trees, sirens howled in the distance. A white wildlife rescue truck skidded into view, tires crunching the gravel. A woman in a heavy vest and respirator mask jumped out. "You okay?" she shouted, running toward Ellie. Ellie dropped to her knees, clutching the jacket sling. "Bobcat kittens," she gasped. "One might be critical." The rescue worker's eyes widened. She waved to her partner. "We need a med kit now." More responders poured in. One took Tamar. Another cradled the two smaller kittens. A stretcher was brought for Ellie, but she waved it off. "I'm fine. Just help them." The mother bobcat hadn't followed them past the tree line. She stood just at the edge, hidden in the shadows, watching. Ellie turned, eyes searching the dark. "She's there," she whispered. The rescue woman nodded. "We'll make sure her babies are safe. We have a secure center nearby, Sedona Wildlife Haven. Once they're stable, we'll reevaluate for reintroduction." "She came for them," Ellie said, her voice breaking. "She led me to them." "Then you saved them both." Ellie watched as the kittens were gently loaded into crates lined with heated blankets and oxygen tubes. Tamar looked up through the mesh, eyes dazed but calm. She recognized Ellie. There was no doubt. But Tamar wasn't going back into the wild. Her limp remained, subtle but permanent. The vet later confirmed an old fracture that had fused poorly. Survivable, but limiting. She'd never be fast enough to hunt, never agile enough to survive on her own. Ellie didn't need convincing. "I'll take her," she said softly, while signing the temporary custody forms. She already chose me. It took weeks to recover. The fire scorched nearly 3,000 acres, but spared the central canyon where Ellie's cabin stood. Smoke damage, yes, but her home survived, as did her family. 2 weeks later, she returned to the cabin. Tamar slept curled in a new bed by the window. Jasper had taken to lying next to her, snout tucked near her paws. Ellie hung her first completed painting, Firewatch, above the mantel. In it, a golden retriever stands guard at a porch. Behind him, a woman holds a blanket, and just beyond the trees, a bobcat watches from the smoke. The wild had come to her door that winter. Not to take, but to give. To remind her that healing doesn't always knock gently, but when it does, we should answer. Some stories remind us that love doesn't always come with words or logic. It comes with instinct, with presence, with the quiet act of showing up when it matters most. Ellie's journey with Tamar and the mother bobcat shows us that sometimes the deepest healing begins not with fixing, but with listening. Listening to silence, to pain, to what's wild, both outside and within. And in that space of trust, miracles can grow. Fragile at first, but enduring. In a world that often fears what it doesn't understand, Ellie chose compassion over control, empathy over convenience. Her story is a powerful reminder. We don't need to tame everything we fear. Sometimes, we just need to make space for it to breathe. Here at Paw Prints and Stories, we believe every paw print carries a tale worth telling. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that healing often comes in unexpected forms. So here's your challenge. This week, let go of one fear and welcome something wild. And remember,